Hey guys, Chelsea here at the Coffee Break. So today's video is actually something that I feel like was a long time coming. I just didn't realize it until now. A while back, I did a video with Glamour. It was basically a house tour where we talked about the different things that we had in our apartment, how much everything costs, to try to give people an idea of what budgeting looks like for putting together an apartment that looks like ours. It was something that I was so excited about, and it's just been really cool because there's been really wonderful feedback, and I just want to say thank you, for anybody who maybe came over from that video. Thank you for like all the sweet comments and for having nice things to say about our place or about me or book. Like it's a weird thing in retrospect to have that type of engagement, but it really did mean a lot to me, and it made me feel very loved and encouraged. At the same time, I also realized that there were a ton of comments that I actually think pretty warranted, where people were kind of confused about the intent of the video. And I want to speak about that specifically, but just to give you guys an overview, today's video, I'm going to go through the main questions that I came across in the comments in no particular order, because I don't know how YouTube generates the ones that I see. But I tried to tackle the main comments and questions that I saw, and I'll do my best to respond or hopefully provide information that might be useful. But going back to my initial point, the one thing that I wanted to kind of piggyback on is that after reading the comments, I realized that there are a lot of people who go to videos like this and they're looking for the nitty-gritty. They want to know the numbers, they want to know the lifestyle, how much are they bringing in, how much is going out, all those different things. I personally don't watch these types of videos, so the way it was presented to us was that it was a video where we would be going through our place. Like I said, we're coming more from like an interior background, and design in that way. So I feel like, to me, it made perfect sense that, a magazine would come and that they would feature our place and we would be able to share specifically how we created the space that we have, just because I'd say probably 50% of the engagement on my blog is based on just living and plants and stuff like that. So I'm getting questions about that all the time. So in retrospect though, I do see that a lot of people did have questions that were more specifically about lifestyle and spend and all those different things. So I do kind of feel bad about that, because I don't know that it was communicated to the audience that it really was more of a house tour, specifically on how the house was put together. And that's something that, the video is already made and it's been out for a long time, so there's nothing we can really do about that. But having said that, like I said, I do want to go through the questions because I think it'll help give perspective just for people who were looking for that. And I'll do my best to hopefully answer some questions that people had, and hopefully it'll be helpful and just provide information that people would find useful. So the first question that I saw a lot was that people clicked on the title because they saw that my profession was copywriting and they wanted to know more about either being a copywriter or how to become a copywriter. So copywriting is something that I think, in terms of title, I kind of fell into. I technically am a freelancer who does digital content creation. So whether that's for a magazine, which is where I started out doing social media and other type of content, interviews, stuff like that, for online, or strictly copywriting work where maybe I have a client that needs to redo their entire website, or they want to run a brand campaign and they need the actual writing behind that. I've had a really wide range of client work creating copy for a client. So to answer the question, a copywriter is someone who creates copy. Copy is any written piece on, like, whether it's a website or social media, or I don't know, it could be anything, an ad, that's the copy. So if you're a copywriter, you're the person who creates that written content. For people who want to get into copywriting, my recommendation, just based on personal experience, is definitely to go through creative agencies, recruiting agencies who place creative professionals. So for me, that might be if I'm looking for a social media role, which I don't really look for those as much anymore, or if I'm looking specifically for a copywriter role. It's a great way to get client work that might be temporary, but it's also a great way to get client work where they're looking for a full-time hire. So if that's a space that you're in or that you want to get in and you think you're a really good writer, I definitely would suggest going to a creative circle or going to a creative group so you can find jobs specifically for people who are looking to hire a copywriter. They're also, you could do the stereotypical thing. You could go on LinkedIn, you can look online, see if you're coming across jobs that are specifically listed for copywriters. But like I said, for me personally, I think job searching is a little tricky when you're a freelancer. At least that's been my experience. And because of that, I've always liked to give myself an additional support system by having an agency to work with and help you find work. The next question that I saw a lot that I was kind of surprised by is people wanted to know how I was able to save $10,000 on a $50,000 salary. So I think something that was kind of tricky about the video is so you tape for like 12 hours, like it's like a forever shoot, and you share so much information. And even when you share what you think is like pulling up your drawers, trying to be transparent and provide information, it seems like there are people who like either missed it or feel like they didn't get enough information or whatever. So to answer the question, that money that I've been able to save up it really just comes down to lifestyle. Like, I don't know that there's another way to describe that. For me, I'm a super saver. Like, I am really hardcore about like going without so that I can save. Also, I think it's really important to mention that I made a lot more money when I lived in New York, partly because my salary was higher, and then also because we did Airbnb. So going back and forth between Philly. We were listing my apartment in New York. I go back and forth to Houston a lot. So my Airbnb in New York did like amazing. And it put me in position to not only plan with my now husband, Warren, our Airbnb business and like real estate business for the future. But it also gave me, for the first time in my adult entrepreneurial life, an opportunity to be able to see what life can look like with having a significant influx of income prior to, when I was working for myself in Houston and just trying to like do the best I could and, figure it out and those different things. Like Airbnb literally like changed my life financially. And it's just the coolest thing. So I say that to say, I think that, I think for the purposes of trying to be concise, I think they were trying to give you guys like a straightforward overview of my life. But in the video, we talked about everything. We talked about how I have a nonprofit. My nonprofit has a grant, about how I do freelance work as a copywriter. That's another source of income. Like I said, we do Airbnb. That's another source of income. So all these different things contribute to my overall lifestyle. I think for me, it was just really important to not give an inflated number, because it varies. I mean, Airbnb it's in the hospitality business. Like sometimes you're booked a lot and sometimes you're not booked as much. So it really does fluctuate, but overall, like I said, it just has significantly created a space for me to be able to have options financially that I wouldn't be able to have before. I think just in terms of wanting to provide you guys with an average yearly income, I think if you take the good years with the bad years, it kind of mellows out to like $50,000 a year. So I think that that's significant. I also want to point out that when you're a freelancer and you work for yourself, this isn't everyone's experience, but this is at least mine. I am doing contract work. So when you're doing contract work, you sign a contract. A lot of times there's a 90-day period where you guys are working together and you evaluate if it's going to work. And then if it does work, you go on and you finalize the details of the contract, which may be done at the beginning, to confirm whether or not you guys will continue working together. So I think one of the other questions that I saw was like, why aren't you just paying off your debt if you have money in savings? And really what it comes down to is when you work for yourself, whether it's because you're an entrepreneur, freelancer, whatever you want to call it, you don't have the same securities necessarily that you would have when you've been working a regular 9-to-5 job for the last 5 years, 6 years, however long. And because of that, it is extremely, extremely important to be able to have a cushion. So I have a number actually that I don't go below. Because if for some reason there's a huge crisis like the one that we're in now, or if I have a client that has a crisis on their own and they can't afford to pay me anymore, it's really important that I have money to be able to float myself so that I'm able to, and it's kind of a weird conversation because like I said, I'm married now and just everything is different, but leading up to getting married, all these things were things that I was constantly thinking of. And even now that I'm married, Warren and I have projects and businesses that we're building together, and those same principles will still apply. Cash is king. Any banker, business person will tell you that you need to make sure that you always have some cash, because there might be a time where for some reason you have to dip into your savings or you need a rainy day account. And when you're an entrepreneur, that rainy day account might have to pay your rent, it might have to pay your bills, whatever it is that you have coming in. So it's really, really important to, yes, nobody wants to be in debt forever. I'm a big believer in that, but I do think that there are different types of debt. So for instance, like the loans that I have, or excuse me, I call it a loan, but it's really credit card debt that was consolidated into a loan, came specifically from some of the expenses related to building my businesses. So that's another thing. Like a lot of times the ideal scenario is to build a business with money that isn't coming out of your cash, and then so whether that's somebody who's invested in your business or you use credit cards or use a loan, whatever it is, and then you pay yourself back, hence get yourself out of debt as the business grows and is able to pay you back. So I think that those are all things that are really important to acknowledge, especially if somebody says, hey, I heard that she's a copywriter, I think that sounds cool, I'm a good writer, I want to try that too. Just know that like you don't want to feel like you're having the rug pulled from beneath you if you for some reason are no longer employed, but you've paid off your debt, but you don't have any cash to pay your expenses. And I know people do unemployment and stuff like that, but even unemployment takes time for it to get approved. If you don't get approved, what are you going to do? All these things are things that it's really important to think of. So I can't stress that enough. People wanted to also know how I invest. I have a really straightforward platform that I use for investing. It's called Acorns. It's an app, and I use it for not only investing in stocks, I also use it for my IRA. So that's just money that I put aside regularly, and then also, like I mentioned before, I have my savings, and that's a big chunk of it. So I know something else that I feel like I've seen a lot of commentary about, and I feel like I'm a little torn, to be honest, to even address it, because I think, one, it's kind of silly, but two, I do think that people have different preferences when it comes to like relationships and lifestyles and all these things. So I'm trying to make it quick, but I definitely want to at least touch on it. So the last year and a half was spent hardcore saving. Honestly, the last 2.5 years, it's probably been longer than that. And it's because we knew we had a wedding coming up. We knew we wanted to buy a house, and that house specifically, we were being purchased as a property for, as an investment property, right? Because we live in Philly right now, and I'm originally from Houston, Texas, and I just love the idea of us having a home to return to, either when I'm in Houston or when, whenever we don't live in Philadelphia anymore. So having said that, we have had huge expenses over the last 2 years, really, that have really changed the landscape for us financially. So in retrospect, I think something that I kind of realized from the video is I feel like I almost feel like there's a little bit of frustration or disappointment around like the spending information, but it's because it's just really not there. I mean, the money that we have coming in really goes to 3 things. It goes to bills, rent, utilities, stuff like that. It went to savings, and it goes to our businesses, which includes purchasing homes and things like that. So I think it's really interesting to see feedback from people, predominantly women, who are saying things like, oh, why are you contributing when your husband makes so much more money? Or at the time, he was my fiance or whatever. And I think for me, it just kind of painted the picture that, one, Warren wasn't technically part of the video in terms of financial breakdown. So I do understand why I think people are kind of feeling like, hey, if you guys are going to do a video and have couples, I can understand the idea that you should either have both people in the video so they can speak to that, or, you know, just have one person who's single. I understand that line of thought. But at the same time, I just think, one, you know, I can't get with the idea of feeling entitled to somebody else's money. And I think I feel that way, especially prior to getting married. But also, I think that the disconnect for me is, if I am physically able and I'm ambitious and I have my own goals, it is very important for me, short of maybe being pregnant I'm unable to work for some reason, or you know, maybe we start having kids and we just don't want to have them in daycare or something like that. I don't understand the concept of like being a fully functional adult who wants to have your boyfriend or fiance or like take care of you. I don't know, I just don't get it. It's just a bizarre concept to me. Because I have always been fiercely independent. My parents raised me to be that way. My mom was the same way before she started having kids. You know, we're a team and we're trying to build our businesses together. And for us, what that looks like is we both contribute to the household to make sure that we're able to do the things that we want to do. You also have to keep in mind, like, to everyone's point, I make significantly less money than Warren. So I think it's really important to at least have the wherewithal to think about the fact that the houses that we're buying, you know, large chunk of the wedding, like honeymoon, all those things are coming directly out of his income. That's the first thing. The second thing is that when you're an athlete, you can't do that job forever. So unlike somebody who's an attorney or a doctor or whatever, a wise athlete, in my humble opinion, lives on a reduced income, which is what my husband does, so that when he transitions out of his sport, we aren't, once again, this whole thing about being cash poor, we're not cash poor and unable to maintain the lifestyle that we've built, which kind of tags me on to the next thing. So there was another comment that somebody brought up, and I definitely want to touch on it because I just think it's building a narrative that in my experience isn't true. So one of the comments was like, you know, I live in Philly, and as somebody who lives in Philly, I can tell you that you can't live in the way that they live on a $50,000 salary. I'm sorry, I have to totally disagree. I've lived on my own now in 3 different cities: Houston, Brooklyn, and Philly, where we live now. And my rent, ironically, has been almost the exact same from city to city to city. Our place in Houston was really nice, so it was actually the second highest rent that I've paid. And then our place, I mean, obviously my place in New York was just, you know, the most expensive out of them. But I have Philly now, and in Texas, in Houston, I had roommates. In New York, my first place, I had roommates, but then my next place, I paid the rent myself for my half of the rent, and then Airbnb paid the other half of the rent. And honestly, Airbnb did so well that it got to the point where, like, I literally didn't have to pay anything for the actual functioning of the apartment, not the rent, not the utilities. That's just how well the business did. And then, so all that savings went towards the wedding and stuff like that. And getting out of debt, honestly, it was a huge chunk of it. And then now that we live in Philly, it just coming from New York, my rent is significantly lower. So it's one of those things where I think for me, it is a really weird concept for someone who's making $50,000 a year to think that they can't afford to live in an apartment like ours, just because if you have a roommate, it's very, very realistic. So I think for me, like, and this is something that I think sometimes is a disconnect that I think I have just in general, like, whether it's building a business or the lifestyle that you want to have or traveling, like, sometimes you just can't have it all, you know? And I do think different people have different experiences, right? So if you're helping support your family, right, that might be hard for you. Or if you have a lot of student loan debt and you are paying like crazy monthly fees. I was really blessed. My dad paid for undergrad for me, and then I paid my way through grad school. Like, I just saved up the money and paid it because I lived at home. You know, there are different things that I've done and sacrifices that I've made to be able to either pay my way or be able to, you know, live a lifestyle that I want to have, right? So when you work for yourself, that means that, like, sometimes you have to be more conservative, right? So that means we're not taking trips all the time. We're not always, you know, eating out and doing some of the things I think are a natural part of a couple's lifestyle. But because of that, we're able to build the businesses that we really love, and we've been able to, just see a future for ourselves beyond our current circumstances, which I'm just really, really thankful for. So I know that like a lot of people were like, oh, she said more and a lot, like we a lot and all that type of stuff. And it's so funny because when I was looking at the other videos, I was like, okay, people are really touchy about that. And I actually, halfway through the video, I had gone to the bathroom at some point because we had stopped shooting, and I called my little sister and I was like, they've asked so many questions about Warren and like his business. I was like, they're gonna be like Warren in the comments. And I was like, oh, we'll just see how they edit it. And if it comes out like that, and of course I feel like even if it had been edited differently, I just think that's kind of how it would have come off. But man, that's my baby, and we are building something really beautiful, and I'll shout it from the rooftops. Like, I'm proud of him and he's done an amazing job. So anyway, I say all that to say that I do want to present, because like I said, you guys really got the gist of it in the video. We have our rent, we have our utilities, we have groceries, but other than that, that money that we bring in is going to savings and going directly back into our businesses. So there isn't I don't know what the perception of the lifestyle was. I don't know, like it's just kind of boring. Like, I guess that's like kind of disappointing, right? Like there isn't like a secret underlying layer of like what we have going. We're just over here grinding and, trying to make it happen. But what I can say is that, when I set up my apartment in New York, I set it up almost from scratch. I just had like a bed, a desk, and like kind of like an organizer thing. And then I just set up our house in Houston, and both of those were done with like, honestly, like we set a budget and then just executed it. So I say that to say, if that would be helpful or useful, I'd be happy to create videos just to be able to kind of like show that side of expenses and like, all those different things. Because I think the biggest challenge is that, and there was one girl in particular who I just thought she asked some really great questions. And one of the questions that she asked was like, did they buy everything for the apartment at the time that they set it up? Or like, did they already have everything? So I think that's really significant. So when we were moving in, we were already engaged. We knew that we wanted to save for the wedding, that we wanted to start doing a business together. We had all these different plans in place. So as a result, out the gate, one of our hard rules was that we were going to use what we had to set up the apartment. So there wasn't like this shopping spree to like fill up the space. I had a 2-bedroom, 1-bath apartment in Brooklyn. Warren had his apartment in Philly. He also had already been living in Philly for I think like almost 4 years or something like that by the time we got this place. So you're really merging 2 households. And we stuck to it. We didn't go out and get more stuff for the apartment. We really did use, with the exception of plants, I will say, we already had a whole lot of plants. So there have been a few purchases for plants here and there, but if it seems like we're giving you guys blind spots in terms of like our spending or our expenses, that's not the case in the context of the video. It really was set up more to be like a house tour and just to show you guys how much everything costs. Now, what I can say is that it would have been extremely expensive to have had to purchase everything like either right before we moved in or right when we moved in, just because from setting up the Houston house, from setting up my apartment in New York, but specifically the Houston house, it is just so expensive to set up a house from scratch. So, like I said, if you guys are interested in getting a budget breakdown of how I set up my apartment in New York, because everything was itemized. Like when you go into a business, you have to itemize everything and you have to know what you're gonna need to make to pay yourself back. And the same thing is true for the Houston house. So for anybody who maybe wants to get into Airbnb, or who, kind of just needs to set up their first place or a new place and they just don't know where to start, I would be more than happy to create that video, because we've been killing it when it comes to setting budgets and honoring it. So anyway, I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I think that's pretty much it. So if you have any questions specifically about what I talked about today, or if you have feedback in terms of like setting up a space, or just in general about copywriting, or last but not least, my book, Speak Those Things, 52 Affirmations to Build a Life You Love. Feel free to message me or comment below. And like I said, I just want to kind of like leave with this. There were just so many sweet, wonderful, thoughtful comments and feedback and like messages that I got like on my personal pages, and people who went out and got the book, like, oh my gosh, thank you so much for that. Like it was a very, very sweet experience. And like I said, I just really want to say thank you for that, because obviously you never know how it's going to go with stuff like this. And it just, the community, I feel like that came out of it is just so loving, and I just really, really appreciate it. So I just want to kind of drive that home and say thank you for that. And yeah, I hope I touched on everything, and subscribe to the Coffee Break. Thanks. Take care.